is 1630. The Catholics have overrun most of Germany. And now to the rescue of the Protestants comes Gustavus Adolphus, King of Sweden. He has landed his army in Pomerania. The Swedish have 6 veteran units and 3 subordinate commanders under Gustavus Adolphus: Johann Banner, Bernard of Saxe-Weimar, and Gustavus Horn. Gustavus Adolphus, Banner, and Bernard are dynamic leaders. The Swedish veteran units are among the strongest in the game. The drawback is that they cannot be replaced nor recruited. So the Swedish will rely heavily on recruiting Protestant militia and mercenaries to absorb the losses in combat. Imperial Catholic forces are not far away. In Mecklenburg, there are 3 mercenary units under the command of Count Savelli, and there is a mercenary unit south of the Swedish here in Barwald. At the beginning of the game, the Catholic has 45 victory points, and for the Protestants to win, they have to reduce it to 30 or less. And the way victory points are obtained is by conquering areas. For example, Mecklenburg is worth 2 victory points, as signified by the box in red, and that control of that area goes to the side that has control of 2 of its cities. At the beginning of the game, the Protestants control Brandenburg, and also to the south, they control the fortress independent city of Magdeburg. However, Saxony is an electorate that is allied to the Catholics, and south of there, in the Upper Palatinate, is the main Bavarian army under Johann Cerclaes, also known as Count Tilly, and it is composed of 5 Bavarian mercenaries for a total of 15 combat factors. The Protestants have more enemies. To the east is the main imperial army at Vienna, commanded by Piccolomini, consisting of 10 combat factors of mercenaries and militia. The Imperials have the option of recalling into service Count Albrecht von Wallenstein, an able leader and the best recruiter in the game. Historically, Wallenstein amassed so much power and influence that the emperor ordered him assassinated. To reflect this in the game, Wallenstein points are kept tally of, and they are earned when Wallenstein wins a battle, recruits new units, or captures a city. If these points reach the 20 mark, the Protestant wins a major victory. For the Catholic player to avoid this, he may dismiss Wallenstein or order him to be assassinated. At the beginning of the game, Wallenstein starts dismissed. So in the Wallenstein phase, the Catholic player can recall him into service or do nothing, or if already in service, he may order him assassinated. Also worth pointing is that the Spanish are allied to the Catholics, and a considerable Spanish army, that of Córdoba, starts at Brussels in the Spanish Netherlands. However, the Spanish are limited in the area of operations. In this game, you see that red line, that shows the easternmost part of the Spanish zone. Spanish units cannot move outside of the Spanish zone. They must stay inside at all times. The only exception is the army of the Cardinal Infante, which begins the game in Trent, but still that army, at the conclusion of the second turn, when it is in play, it must cross into the Spanish zone. As part of the preparation for play, each side places 10 pillage points on the map. In order to pay for the cost of its troops, each side receives aid from foreign sources. The Protestants receive aid from France, England, and the United Provinces. The Catholics, on the other hand, receive aid only from Spain. They do not receive any aid from the Pope because the current Pope, Urban VIII, is opposed to providing any aid at all. Certain cities and areas are electorates, and at the beginning of the game, the Catholics have control of 6 of 7 electorates. If they gain control of all, they will receive 5 additional victory points. Throughout the 30 Years' War, the Spanish were engaged in a war against the Dutch, or the United Provinces, as they were called, which is represented abstractly in the game through the Dutch war track. The play of certain event cards can move the Dutch war marker to the right in favor of the Spanish, or to the left in favor of the Dutch. The Dutch war track has a profound effect on the amount of aid that the Protestants can receive from the United Provinces. For example, if the marker reaches the +5 box all the way to the right, the war has ended with the Spanish victory, ceasing all aid to the Protestants. This scenario has 3 turns, and it starts in turn 6, and it ends at the conclusion of turn 8. So we go to the first phase, which is the Wallenstein phase, and the Catholics will recall Wallenstein into service. So Wallenstein is placed with the main imperial army at Vienna. The next phase is the Pillage recovery phase, where each player rolls a die. The result is divided by 2, rounded up, and that is the number of pillage points that each side can remove from the board. Throughout the game, we will use these dice. The white die will be the Protestant die, and the red die, the Catholic. So the Protestants roll a 6, so they can remove 3, and the Catholics a 7, and they can remove 4 pillage points. Only 1 pillage point can be removed per phase from a space, so a point will be removed from Demmin and also from Stettin, and 1 point will be removed from Stralsund. Now the Catholics remove 4 points, 1 from Vienna, 1 from Bamberg, 1 from Leipzig, and finally 1 from Munich. The next phase is the card draw phase, and both players draw cards from their respective unplayed piles until they have 7 cards in their hands. Let's take a look at each of the sides' initial hands. A word about the cards. Since this is a card-driven game, cards can be used for one of 4 purposes: to activate a leader, which has a activation rating which is equal or less than that shown in the card. Also, to recruit units, and this number would signify the number of recruitment attempts that can be done by the play of this card. The card can be used to be played for its event, in which case if the event has an asterisk like this one, it is removed permanently after it is played. And finally, the card can be used to receive foreign aid points from the powers listed therein in the bottom, and only 1 card can be played for foreign aid points in a turn. Now, looking at the Protestant hand, we see that the Protestants have 2 combat cards signified by these red CC. So these are cards that can be used in combat to increase the Protestant die roll by 1. And we see that this card is a card that can be used to influence the Dutch war track. And the other cards that we have are 2-point cards and 1 3-point card, including this one, which would switch Saxony to the Protestant side if the conditions listed therein apply. You see here that this card, Satch of Magdeburg, has an effect of decreasing the victory point level by 2 if the conditions apply there and it is used for the event. Here we have the Catholic hand, and we also have here 2 combat cards. We have a very interesting card here, the Cardinal Infante card. This event introduces the Cardinal Infante, who is a very able leader, and 4 Spanish veteran units into the game. And that army, as I stated before, has a limitation that by the end of the 2nd turn in which it is in the game, it has to enter at the end of that turn the Spanish zone, or it is eliminated. They also have here a card which would allow Saxony to switch sides back to the Catholic side. This is the initial situation at the beginning of the game. As stated before, the Protestants have the burden of attacking and seizing territory for victory points. They start up here with the Swedish, and they have some enemy forces in Mecklenburg that they have to deal with, and they also have to push south to gain the victory point. So it is a perfectly feasible strategy for the Catholics to wait for the Protestants in this area here in Saxony and not waste themselves in piecemeal attacks, especially when the Bavarian army cannot attack in conjunction with the Imperial army, which is here to the south, unless a particular event card is played and allows that. So at the beginning of the game, we will see that the Swedish will divide their army in two forces. One force will push towards Mecklenburg to get rid of these imperial forces, and the other will push south in this direction. So we begin the action phase with the first Protestant activation. Protestants will play this card for the activation point to activate Gustavus Adolphus. Gustavus will activate all leaders and 3 of the 6 Swedish veteran units. And Gustavus moves this force to Demmin, and from there into Woodstock. He spends an additional movement point, his third movement point, in Woodstock to overrun the imperial mercenaries, since the Swedish have a 4-to-1 odds advantage, thus eliminating the imperial force. By overrunning the enemy force, the Protestants gain control of Woodstock. Now Gustavus leaves his 3 veteran units there and 2 of his leaders, and he heads back with Bernard to Demmin and back to Stettin. Gustavus having expended 5 of his 8 movement points. In Stettin, he picks up the Swedish veterans there and moves the force south to Barwald, spending his 6th movement point. Now he spends his 7th movement point overrunning the mercenary force there, since he has a 4-to-1 advantage. Thus, the imperial unit is eliminated, and Barwald now comes under Protestant control. Finally, Gustavus spends his 8th and last movement point to move his force into Frankfurt on the Oder and lay siege to that fortress. And a marker is placed to signify the beginning of the siege. And because Gustavus marched 6 combat units, this march causes 2 points of pillage to be placed in cities where the armies passed through or ended. A pillage point is placed in Barwald, and in Demmin it is increased to level 2. And that's the end of Gustavus's activation. First Catholic activation. The Catholics, having drawn the Cardinal Infante card, they want to use this army as early as possible, possibly in combination with the Bavarian army. So this card will be played for the event, and Cardinal Infante and his army will be deployed in Trent. And as we see here, his army is composed of 4 Spanish veteran units for a total of 16 combat factors. So we place Cardinal Infante and his army in Trent. The Cardinal Infante and his army start down here in Trent. It will take more than 1 activation for the army to be able to be combined with Tilly's army and push into Saxony, where they may encounter the Swedish. By the end of the next turn, the second turn of the game, the Cardinal and his army have to cross this red line here that runs from north to south into the Spanish zone, or it will be eliminated wherever it is. And because this card was played for the event and it has an asterisk, it is removed from the game. Now it's the second Protestant activation. Each turn has 6 activations. Now the Protestants have to decide whether they will attack here with Banner's army, or first pick up this Protestant militia in order to use it in the attack and absorb some losses, or a recruitment attempt, or attempts can be made to strengthen Banner's army and Gustavus's army before engaging in any battles. So the Protestants play this card, and it will be played to perform 3 recruitment attempts. Now the rules only allow 1 leader to make a maximum of 2 recruitment attempts per card. So we will make 2 recruitment attempts with Banner and 1 with Gustavus. Banner is dynamic leader. That means he gets a +1 die roll modifier in recruitment attempts. He will make 1 recruitment attempt for militia and the other for Protestant mercenaries. So we roll first for militia. So it's an 8 modified by a +1 to a 9, 3 militia steps. Each full-strength militia unit like this one is worth 2 steps, and a half-strength militia unit is worth 1. Now we perform a die roll for the mercenary recruitment with a +1 die roll modifier for dynamic leadership. Die roll is a 5 modified to a 6, one step of mercenaries, which is equal to a reduced strength mercenary unit. Now Gustavus will make one die roll to try to recruit militia. 1 is added to the die roll because of Gustavus's dynamic leadership. A 2 is rolled modified to 3, one step or a reduced strength militia unit is recruited. Second Catholic activation. And the Catholics play this card for its activation value to activate Cardinal Infante. So the Cardinal moves his army to Innsbruck and into Munich, where he will pick up the Bavarian leader Aldringer and the Bavarian mercenaries. He moves to Freising and to Ingolstadt, and he ends his move in Nuremberg. He didn't continue into Bamberg because he would be overstacked with Tilly's forces there, and Cardinal Infante's army also has a limitation that he cannot separate his veteran units, so they all have to be in one city at the same time. His march causes one pillage level to be placed in Innsbruck. Third Protestant activation. Now the Protestants play this card for its activation value to activate Banner. Banner has 7 units and 17 combat factors. He can move all these units into Rostock to attack Savelli because of his combined leadership with that of Bernard. So all the units are moved into Rostock, and we have our first battle. Because Banner marched 7 units, his march created 2 pillage points, which are placed in Rostock. The Swedish and Protestants have 17 combat factors, the Catholics 6. The Protestants roll on this column, the 15 to 19 combat factor column, and Banner has a 2 as a battle rating, so 2 is added to the die roll. None of the sides decide to play a combat card at this time. So a die roll is made. The die roll is a 4 modified to a 6, so 9 loss factors are inflicted on the Catholic force. Now each unit has a loss factor, which is the second or middle number here, the 3. So each unit can be flipped, absorbing that number of factors. So we flip both mercenary units, and we put a red marker underneath to signify that they have been flipped. So far they have only absorbed 6 loss factors, so one unit now has to be eliminated to absorb all 9 loss factors. And we place an X on top of the eliminated unit. Now the Catholics fire with the strength equal to their original force, which was 6 combat factors. And they roll on the 5 to 7 combat factor column with no modification because Savelli's battle rating is 0. The roll is an 8, inflicting 5 loss factors on the Protestant force. And the 5 loss factors will be satisfied by eliminating this reduced militia unit for 2 points and eliminating this reduced mercenary unit for 3 more points for a total of 5. Okay. Now to finish, we have to check for leader loss. Each leader has a rating in the right middle part of his counter. For example, Savelli has a 7, and a roll is made, and if the result is equal or higher than that loss rating, the leader is dead, and if this is the front side of the leader, he is flipped to his back side, which will show his replacement leader. So we start with Savelli, 1 die is rolled. A 1 is rolled and Savelli survives. Now we roll for Bernard. The roll is a 5, he also survives, and now we roll for Banner. And the roll is a 1, and he survives also. Now we remove the eliminated units. Because the Catholics received the greater loss result, they are the losers of the battle and they have to retreat. So Savelli and the surviving reduced mercenary unit retreat. So the surviving imperial units and Ravelli retreat into Wismar. And by occupying Rostock, now the Protestants have two cities in Mecklenburg under their control, and that is just what it's needed to obtain control of the area of Mecklenburg. So we signify that by flipping the control counter, and we place the Catholic control marker in Wismar. And this means that the Catholics lose 2 victory points because of losing control of the area, so now the score is 43. Now it's the Catholics' third activation. And the Catholics play this card to activate again Cardinal Infante. So the Cardinal's army is here. It has 4 Spanish veterans and 1 Bavarian mercenary. And it will move into Bamberg. It will not pick up any units there. From there, we'll go to Lutzen and to Leipzig, where it will pick up Saxon-elected John George and his militia. And he will move the combined force to Torgau, and finally into Magdeburg. The Protestant militia has 2 choices. It can face the combined Catholic force in one land battle, which would probably be suicide, or it can react by retreating inside the fortress city, and they will do just that. So now the Catholics lay siege to Magdeburg, and they can do so because they have combat factors that are in excess of the combat factors of the militia plus the fortress rating of Magdeburg, which is 4. And Cardinal Infante's march causes 2 points of pillage to be placed. We will place one in Torgau and the other in Leipzig. And that concludes his activation. Protestant fourth activation. The Protestants are coming up with an activation in which they could overrun Savelli here with Banner's army, but the situation is that Cardinal Infante has 21 combat factors and is laying siege here to Magdeburg. The Protestant forces are divided. Banner has 14 and Gustavus 13 combat factors. So the Cardinal could take any one of those 2 forces, and bear in mind that the Cardinal has a 3 battle rating which is equal to that of Gustavus, and worse yet, his survival rating, his combat loss rating is 8, so he is harder to kill than Gustavus. In addition, Tilly, with 1 march, could invade Brandenburg and serve as bait for any one of these 2 forces, with the Cardinal here held back in reserve. So the Protestants will play this card to activate Banner. So Banner is activated and he moves into Wismar. He expends an additional movement point to overrun the Catholic mercenaries there. Now he heads back to Rostock and from there to Stralsund, where the militia joins his force. He ends his move in Stralsund and his march causes 1 pillage marker to be placed in Wismar. Catholic fourth activation. The Catholics play this card to activate Tilly. Tilly starts his activation in Bamberg. He moves to Lutzen, from there to Fulda in Hesse Castle, an area controlled by the Protestants. Spends a 3rd movement point to gain control of Fulda. Moves into Kassel, spends his 5th movement point to overrun the Protestant mercenary unit there, and ends his activation by moving his army to Wetzlar, although he does not have sufficient movement points from his units to convert that city to Catholic control. So 1 pillage marker is placed in Fulda as a result of this march. 5th Protestant activation. The Protestants play this card for the event, and the event is triggered because during the preceding round the Catholics captured Fulda and Kassel. So the pillage level for that city, in this case it will be Kassel, will be increased by 2, and 2 victory points are subtracted. So we see that the pillage level in Kassel cannot be increased the full 2 levels, so it will be increased to level 2 for the net effect of a +1 pillage level. And 2 victory points are subtracted, and now the score is 41 victory points. Now it's the Catholics' 5th activation. The Catholics have three-point cards left. They will play this card for the purpose of activating Tilly. So Tilly is presently in Wetzlar and he is activated. He spends a movement point to control Wetzlar, and now the Catholics control Hesse Castle. So control reverts to the Catholics. We eliminate the control marker since now it's all Catholic control. And the Catholics gain 2 points on the victory point track. Now the score goes up to 43. Tilly moves back to Kassel, from there to Fulda, to Lützen, and into Leipzig, where he ends his activation, and his march causes 1 level of pillage in Wetzlar. Now it's the 6th and last activation for this turn for the Protestants. These are the 2 cards remaining in the Protestant player's hand, and they will play this card for the purposes of assigning foreign aid points to the Protestants. So the Protestants normally would receive 12 foreign aid points, but because the Dutch war track marker is at +2, -2 is deducted from the aid received by the United Provinces, so it will be 10 aid points. And the 10 points are registered by placing this marker on the general records track. Catholic 6th and final round of this turn. The Catholics have not played a card for foreign aid, and at this time they will play this card for the foreign aid points. So 11 foreign aid points will be recorded. Remember that the papacy is not sending aid because of Urban VIII's stance against it. So we place the markers on the general record track. And that is the end of the action rounds for turn 1. Now we go to the pay phase, where units are paid with foreign aid points, and any units left unpaid are marked with unpaid markers, and these units have to roll on the loot table. For a unit to be paid, it has to trace a line of communications to its supply source, and the units get paid at a rate of 2 aid points for veterans and mercenaries and 1 aid point for militia. Also, aid points cannot be accumulated from turn to turn. We start with the Protestants and they will expend all their 10 aid points. The 10 foreign aid points will be used to pay 5 Swedish veteran units, including the 3 shown here. That leaves the militia unit in Frankfurt on the other unpaid, and it will have to roll on the loot table. There is a -1 die roll modifier for it being stacked with the dynamic leader. A die roll is made and it is a 7 modified to a 6, a pillage 1, and 1 step loss. A pillage 1 marker is placed on the city, and the militia unit, which was at reduced strength, is now eliminated. In Stralsund, the foreign aid points were sufficient to pay 2 of the 3 Swedish veterans, so now 1 Swedish veteran and 2 Protestant militia units remain unpaid and will roll on the loot table. The die roll is a 9, reduced to 8 because they are stacked with banner dynamic leader. The result is pillage 2 and 1 step loss. A pillage 2 marker is placed and 1 of the militia units will be reduced. The Catholics spend their 11 aid points. The imperial troops in Vienna do not have to spend points because they are locally paid. Cordoba's Spanish troops are also locally paid, so they don't have to roll on the loot table. 10 of the 11 foreign aid points will be used to pay Tilly's 5 mercenary units at a rate of 2 points per unit, so that leaves 1 aid point left. The remaining foreign aid point will be used to pay for the Saxon militia in Cardinal Infantes' force besieging Magdeburg. That means that 5 units here are unpaid, 4 Spanish veterans and 1 Bavarian mercenary. Now there are several die roll modifiers which are applicable. A -1 because Cardinal Infante is a dynamic leader, a -1 because the majority of units are veterans. However, there is a +1 because of the plus of the level 1 pillage marker, and a +1 because there are 4 or more units looting, so there is a total 0 modifier, and now we roll a die on the loot table. The result is an 8, a pillage 2 plus 1 step loss. Since a space can only receive a maximum of 2 levels of pillage, a pillage 2 result would place it at level 3, so the excess is taken from the units as a loss. So there will be a total of 2 steps lost here because of looting. And that will be satisfied by eliminating the Bavarian mercenary unit and satisfying that 2-step loss. And now the pillage goes up to 2. And the result is a 6 plus 3, 9. Pillage 2 and 1 step loss. Now the besieged Protestant militia rolls on the loot table with the pillage conditions that existed before the Catholic loot table die roll. So the modifiers are plus 2 because the unit is besieged, and a plus 1 for the pillage marker for a total of plus 3. The die roll is a 6, modified to a 9, pillage 2, and 1 step loss. The step loss causes the militia to be flipped to its reduced side. And the pillage 2 result, when added to the original pillage 1 level, results in a pillage 3 total, which is 1 level beyond the maximum level of pillage for one city. So the excess level of pillage is converted into an additional step loss, and therefore the militia unit is eliminated. The siege, however, continues against the fortress. Now we go to the end phase, and a die is rolled on the siege table for each continuing siege. So now we check for the siege of Frankfurt on the Oder. A die is rolled on the siege table. There are no modifiers. The die roll is 5 and the siege is successful. And the Swedish gain control of Frankfurt on the Oder. Now we check for the siege of Magdeburg. A die roll is made on the siege table, and this time there is a -1 modifier because of Magdeburg's siege rating. The die roll is a 3, modified to a 2, and the siege is unsuccessful. So the Catholics fail to take the city this time, but the siege marker is flipped to its +1 side, increasing the chance for the fall of the city by siege in the next turn. Now, each of the sides may voluntarily discard the cards that are left in their hand, keeping a maximum of 1 card, and in this case, both sides decide to keep the card that they have. Now we move to the scenario's second turn, turn 7,